originating from the podcast studio inside FAM 360's headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. The Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast is designed to encourage, equip, and inspire our audience through a combination of inspirational stories and real-life experiences shared by other successful and skilled leaders in a variety of vocations. We hope that the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast empowers each one of us to step out, step up, and ultimately thrive as leaders. Now here's our host, Mr. Matt Maloney.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Mr. Matt Maloney. I am super thrilled to have today's guest on. Before I reveal who she is, I'm going to give the audience a little reveal about her. Our guest today is a British, New York-based women's leadership expert who has helped hundreds of women step into their power and write their own rules for success, while also helping hundreds of men understand how best to support those women. Her career journey as a global marketing executive yielded her opportunities and challenges as she earned her way into leadership roles at large global companies. But eventually, she realized, among other things, that her calling in life was to serve other aspiring and current leaders by helping them grow in their professional careers and ultimately find life satisfaction. And having seen firsthand the experiences women disproportionately face in their careers, she created a book, The Unwritten Rules of Women's Leadership, to empower women with tools to write their own rules, navigate their versions of success, and achieve their potential. And if you were to ask our guest about her personal side, she would describe herself as a fantastic shopper, an average yogi, and a terrible cook, which I find hard to believe. Without further ado, please welcome Miss Helen Appleby.
Thank you, Matt. My goodness me. That's quite the introduction.
It was a mouthful.
Yeah.
But well worth it. Well, so thanks for joining us today on the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. Really, really excited to have you. I'm really excited that what my audience is going to yield from this experience. And so I think, why don't we start off, just tell the audience a little bit about yourself, maybe starting with just maybe your childhood upbringing. Seems like your father had a profound impact on your life. I know you mentioned him in your book.
He told me that girls can do anything that boys can do. And, I did. At a young age, I did. I was a fierce competitor and, had all the jobs and the startups and kept really, really busy. I did business. I read business at college and then joined, as you said, I worked for two of the biggest companies in the UK. I guess, what he didn't tell me was that navigating that journey would be harder than I expected, and that there were moments when, I took conflict too personally and was crying in the bathroom and, where I genuinely felt I was, the best person for the role and wasn't given it.
I read about that in your book.
And felt overlooked, and unfairly overlooked. I guess some of that stuff he just wouldn't have understood because he wasn't a woman.
Of course. Yeah.
So, along the way, though, I came through those experiences and really really dug in to learn what it takes to succeed as a woman. And I really felt like all the courses that I went on, I was on all the high potential lists, but they didn't really teach me what I really needed to know to do that as a woman. And, I got there. I ended up, I've lived and worked in 6 countries. And I was running $1 billion business, running the global respiratory health business for a big pharmaceutical company. So I got there. And then, as you said in your introduction, kind of reached a point where I was like, I've climbed the ladder and this is great, but it doesn't really feed my soul. And actually the stuff that I love doing, I realized I actually enjoyed growing people more than I enjoyed growing brands or by then businesses.
Yeah.
And I said that out loud to an executive coach, and it was kind of like the genie was out the bottle. And he said, "What are you going to do about that then?" And that really began, a 5-year journey to qualify as an executive coach, to become an internal executive coach, and then ultimately to leave and to be on the path that I'm on.
So curious, and stepping back for a second before you became an executive coach, and I read that in your book that you had this kind of aha moment when you were talking to your coach and he was probing you for questions. But looking back at the challenges that you went through in your career, right, in the corporate environment, because today there are so many women like you were in that same position being challenged or facing those same challenges. Was there anyone that spoke into you during that period of time? Was there other women that kind of inspired you within those organizations or maybe outside those organizations? Or was it just, Helen had the grit and just determination to keep pushing through and then eventually decide through your coaching or the coach that you had and through some of just your own self-exploration that, hey, I want to leave the corporate world?
There were leaders. Absolutely. There were a ton of leaders that inspired me. Few of them were women because there really weren't many women ahead of me on the journey. And I guess, where I had mentors, that was super helpful. But, I'm sure we'll talk about it later. Getting mentors, finding mentors as a woman is different to finding mentors as a man on that journey. So we'll come back to that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I remember one leader in particular who, I write about in the book, Stan saying to me, "You're really great, Helen." He said, "Why hasn't anyone taken a chance on you?" And that really landed with me. And he did, right? Stan was prepared to take a chance on me. And what I learned later on in the journey is that that's actually quite common. Often men are promoted based on their potential and women are promoted based on their track record.
Yeah.
So if you have a role that needs, A, B, C, D, Matt, you would be promoted because you were good at ABC and, he could do ABC. He's going to crush it.
Indeed. Right.
And then, which, may well be right.
Maybe not.
But when potentially, if the discussion moves to someone called Helen, they'll say, well, she's done ABC, but she hasn't done D yet. So, let's not promote her now. Let's wait till she's done D, right? So it wouldn't be until it was actually in my track record. And that was kind of what Stan was alluding to. Why hasn't anyone taken a chance on you? And he did. And I am, still friends with him and will be forever grateful for that. Right? He saw in me what, others didn't.
That's great. Well, why don't we dive into the book? And I know we've been talking about concepts of the book and some of the stories from the book, but as I said before we started the podcast and sharing with you, first of all, it's a truly great book. I've enjoyed it. I have two daughters, one that's 15, one that's 13, soon to be 14. I have a son as well who's 9. But and this book, for any father who has daughters, this book resonates with me so much. It really does. From a different perspective, obviously, because I'm a man, but it resonates with me so much. And it just, the emotions that welled up inside of me and some of the stories, I could talk about those for hours. We don't have hours to talk about it, but really, it was really fascinating. So I really am truly grateful that you wrote this book for women. And I guess the first question is why the book? You left corporate America, you became this kind of leadership coach, corporate trainer as part of your new career, helping other people become leaders or helping other leaders be greater versions of themselves, particularly women. Why the book?
Honestly, Matt, because I felt like as I was coaching women, the same types of questions and issues kept coming up. And I found myself coaching on similar things over and over again. And they were the similar things that I had that I'd struggled with as well, right? So women disproportionately struggle with these things. And like I said in the first question you asked me, I just didn't feel like all the courses taught me what I needed to know. And so, it was really, how can I codify this? How can I write it down so that more women who, I don't have time to coach every single woman in corporate life.
Right.
I can't change the world one woman at a time. It's going to take too
long. Yeah, right.
So, how can you accelerate that impact? And that is by coaching more senior leaders and by writing a book and, by developing a course and all the stuff that I've gone on to do. Because I want to make a difference. right? It's all about the impact for me.
So describe a little bit just for our audience, just as kind of a teaser inside the book, which I really want to draw them into this so that they'll go out and buy the book. Just give us a few examples of things that you wish you would have known, because there are things that you talk about and use stories and examples throughout the book of things that I wish I would have known this in my career. So I think that's really powerful for women to hear.
Gosh, the first one of which always really resonates with women is the way the unwritten rule is written. It's written as there is visible work and invisible work, and we only get judged on our visible work. Okay. At which point women go, oh gosh, there's so much that I do that they don't know about. I wish I'd known that 10 years earlier in my career. Because, if you're not making your invisible work visible, either no one's getting credit for it because they don't know it's being done, or someone else is getting credit.
Yeah.
And so, it's our jobs, right? If I'm speaking to women, right, it's your job to make that work visible. And so think about, what is the value that you add, the results that you deliver, or the work that you do, and do your stakeholders know about it? So that one is really one, Matt, that I wish that I'd known earlier. The other one is, how do you get mentors, right? The mentoring relationship. Mentors tend to help people that remind them of themselves, right? Including me. Like, look what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I am reaching back to women who are, in corporate life on a similar journey to me and helping, right? That is mentoring.
Yep.
But if you look up in the organization and there isn't anyone that you remind them of themselves, then the likelihood is you won't get asked. And that's what happened to me. And so I knew that I needed mentors, right? The fact that mentors help was not an unwritten rule, right? I knew that. But how do you ask and who do you ask? I didn't know that. And so, that held me back, really. I didn't have the mentors and then consequently the sponsors that I needed sometimes. And then, conflict. I found that, in my family growing up, we didn't yell at each other. And so I found conflict really difficult and took it really personally.
Yeah.
And it took a while for me to learn how to deal with a conflict, how to understand what my conflict style was.
Yeah.
And that there was another style, and therefore not to take it personally. And that was the, trying to cry silently in the bathroom moments.
Yeah.
that I grew through and learned how to manage.
So I think that's fascinating because during the pandemic, I think that brought to the surface a lot of change in corporate America. And one of those things is really learning how to communicate with people and communicate with others. And also, how do we resolve conflict, right? Oftentimes, I think I find it better to resolve conflict when you're in person and you can sit down, put all your cards on the table, talk about it. Whereas in corporate America, when everything was separated in the pandemic, it was very, very difficult. But I guess where I was going with that is that I find that corporations today, in part because of strong female leaders like yourself and others, I find that they have leaned into, in a number of ways, still a long way to go, but have leaned into really helping develop not just the cultures, but the cultures around women leaders in the workplace. And I read some of the things in your book about Fortune 500 companies and the success in those first couple of years, particularly on publicly traded companies, where female CEOs took over those organizations versus male CEOs. And I found that fascinating. That was an interesting statistic that you quoted in your book. And it didn't surprise me, frankly. We always joke in my family that, let's be honest, I think our women are the stronger sex here, to be honest with you. I'm being serious. We talk about that and joke about it all the time in our family. Curious, you had talked about having a women's work more visible. And I want to just come back to that for a moment. What do women need to do to have their work more visible? Can you give some examples?
I think the first thing to do is to understand for themselves what their invisible work is. Because, honestly, Matt, what I think the root of the issue of this is that many of us have many grown women walking around, have a lot of good girl conditioning in us still. And that the way that we succeeded when we were at school was to do good work, color in the lines, sit quietly, get good grades, and we'll be noticed, right? Because sitting quietly and getting good grades works at school, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And, I think women are better at that than men often.
Yeah.
Or girls are better at that than boys.
Yeah.
But the problem is when you show up with those rules in the new game of work, they don't work. What is the invisible work that you do is the first question that I ask. And then I say, right, now, who needs to know, right? Not everyone needs to know what you do, but let's make a second list of who will be in the room or consulted when your next role is discussed. They are your strategic stakeholders. Those are the people who need to know. And then sometimes they'll say, well, it's my boss and HR. And I'm like, oh, I don't think it is, right? That list I would invite you to consider is between 6 and 10 people long.
Much broader,
right?
Yes.
It's not just your boss. It's probably your boss's boss. It could be your HR person that you're talking about, could be their boss, could be, your peers. Other senior leaders in the organization, could be your future boss. So make that list and then sit down and think, okay, if I was to grade those people, red, yellow, or green, on their understanding of me and my performance and the value that I've added and what I want to do next, right? Am I visible to them? Is my work and are my aspirations visible to them? And if they're not, right? If they're yellow or red, if you score them, then what are you doing about it?
Yeah.
Right. And how can you, send an update out, some kind of dashboard, some kind of reporting? How can you book some time with them, give them an update, ask them for advice? And I even say there are often small moments when we meet senior leaders, right? I call them micro encounters. So the few minutes, for instance, that you and I had on Zoom now, before, the engineering team arrived, before the production crew arrived.
Yeah.
What do you say to a senior leader if you are waiting for an Uber or in the elevator with them or first on Zoom? Right? Women will often say, hey, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. And I'll say, no. You're not allowed to say, I'm fine, thanks.
Right.
Yeah, don't, right? And then they'll switch it to, I'm a Brit, the weather. Brits can always talk about the weather, right? Or their kids or something personal. What did you do over the break? Don't do that. Say to them, I'm great. And do you know what, Matt? This project that I'm on, we're driving it through and we're going to come and see you in a few weeks' time and I'm going to ask you for some money because, it's growing fabulously. And, the difference in how Matt, senior leader, walks away thinking about Helen, who, is somewhere in the organization, is so different. Right now, it's not just Helen who's a Brit and who's talking about the rain, but Helen that's working on this project and has some exciting results for me and, is going to come back and I'm going to be asked for money, right? So what a different level of visibility of the brand, of my brand to you. So all of those tools can really help.
Yeah. And I think one of the most powerful things that people can do, particularly if they want to create influence and impact, which I'm going to talk about that in a moment on influence, because I know that's in your book, is ask questions. Ask questions from your leaders. Ask questions, engage. It's another form of engagement that engages not just a basic conversation from the leader, but a reciprocal conversation, a two-way conversation, because now the leader then has to answer the question, talk through that. It's so powerful. We've talked about that so much in some of the leadership groups that I've been in part of. And I think that's perfect.
The way I describe that is give them an update, right? If it's, if you're the senior leader in my organization, if Helen gets time or wants time with Matt, right, I should book time with you and say, hey, I'd like to book 20 minutes in your schedule, Matt. I'd like to ask for your advice, right? Asking for advice is just so powerful. Then we sit down and I say, look, can I give you an update? This is what we've been working on. This is where I'm up to in my career. And I'd like your advice on this. Right? And it has to be authentic, right? I have to actually be curious. So it could be, advice for me in my career or advice on this product that we're developing or, whatever it is. But getting advice from someone the more senior they are and or the bigger their ego, the more they like to be asked for advice usually.
No doubt.
And if I then write it down, and remember it, take it away and do something with it, then I can say to you, that was really helpful, Matt. Can I come back and give you an update in a few weeks' time or in a few months' time? Come back, give you an update. Right? I did what you said. You suggested this. I did this. It did this. It worked. This was the result. Now, any other advice? What I say to women, or what is true for all of us, is people support what they help to build.
Yeah.
Right. So getting advice, being curious, asking questions, listening, demonstrating your listening will help Matt support Helen.
Yeah.
And help him be more curious about what does she want to do next in her career. And then potentially, if that opportunity comes up, oh, I was talking to Helen the other day. She's interested in working in that or working on that. So have we thought about her? And that's sponsorship, right? Bringing me into a room that I can't get into and advocating for me. So that asking questions, asking for advice is just critical. It's so powerful.
So powerful. So powerful. So this is a good segue because you mentioned sponsorship, that's sponsorship, and you mentioned mentorship earlier. So can you explain the difference between mentorship and sponsorship to help further the careers of women? Explain what that is so that our audience understands that.
I mean, the definitions are the same for everyone.
Yeah.
So the way I describe the differences is mentorship is about sharing your journey. So it's sharing the path that you have already gone through, right? I think it comes from the word for map. So it's that sense of, I did this, for instance, for me, I moved and had an international career. I worked in 6 countries. I did international assignments with a big company. That is really helpful for someone, 2 steps behind me who may be thinking about that. How do I ask? How do I get on the list? What do I do when I get there? How do I, manage the kids and the spouse and all the, that's just sharing my journey.
Yes.
That's one thing, right? It's super helpful because it's a career accelerator. How can I help, right? Matt, you, for instance, move internationally. That could, if you were working for the company that I used to work for, that could really accelerate your career. That's different from, and so the way I describe it is mentors talk to you about their journey, different from sponsorship, right? What sponsors do is they talk about you when you're not there. So they advocate for you. So they talk about you in rooms that often you can't get into. So in that previous example where, I'd asked for advice from you and you were the senior leader, I understand, I know that Helen's interested in this. Suddenly I'm in a room that I wouldn't be in. And that is a second level career accelerator.
Yeah.
That kind of support for you to advocate for me can really make a difference, right? And the interesting thing, the distinction between the two is that asking for mentorship, can you share your journey with me, Matt? Can you give me advice on this that I'm dealing with? I can ask for that, right? And as long as you're prepared to give me 20 minutes, you may not really know me, but you're probably going to be able to, willing to do that. Asking you to sponsor me is different, right? Matt, can you advocate for me when I'm not in the room if this comes up? You're like, well, I don't know.
I don't know you. How can I advocate?
Imagine,
right.
How can I advocate for you? Right. I'm going to risk my own brand reputation, my own equity, saying Helen can do this when I don't know that you can. Right. So you can't really ask for sponsorship in the same way. You need to build the relationship. They need to know you. Now, often a source of our best source of sponsors are people that we've worked with really closely, right? Our bosses, our ex-bosses, other senior leaders that have seen a lot of us. But having a mentor that goes on the journey with you, that helps you, that you've given regular updates to, that has got to know, in that situation, if you'd got to know me through, 6 mentor discussions where I'd said, I took this on and this is how I've approached it and this is what the results are and can you help me? Through those 6 sessions, you may well have got to the point where you're like, do you know what? She would be really good for that. And you would sponsor me. So mentors are a potential source of sponsors too, if they're internal. And mentors also don't have to be internal,
right?
Which is another distinction. Whereas sponsors really do.
Yeah, they need to be internal because they've already built, relational
Well,
equity in the organization. That's right. Yeah.
Right. And they're in the rooms where those roles are being discussed. Now, they could be external in another company that you might want to join. So that's another kind of just subtlety of it. But in general, sponsors are within your organization, and mentors can be 2 steps ahead of you on whatever that journey is, right? And the journey could be anything. Could be, being a working mum, moving internationally, moving into finance, getting better at, any one of, a million skills. So it can be all sorts of different things.
Yeah, that's great wisdom. Thank you for sharing that. Helen, thanks so much again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. Thanks for just sharing your wisdom, your insight. It was a real privilege to have you on. And I'm excited to have you on for part 2 of our episode, where we get to learn more about what you're doing and how you're helping women lead both in their careers and in their personal lives towards the best version of themselves. I'd like to close with this quote. It's from Jim Collins. When what you are deeply passionate about, what you can be best in the world at, and what drives your economic engine comes together, not only does your work move towards greatness, but so does your life. For in the end, it is impossible to have a great life unless it is a meaningful life. And again, that's from Jim Collins, and that's actually from your book, Helen. In closing, to all of our subscribers and listeners out in podcast land, thank you for joining us on the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. I pray that our daily journeys are filled with opportunities to lift others up as we aim to go above and beyond. Thanks, everybody.
Our executive producer and host is Matt Maloney, President and CEO of FAM360. Strategic Communication Coordinator, Michelle Ducato. Production assistance by Tin Dog Studios. Director, John Berland. Creative Assistant, Whitney Berland. Theme song, Connecting Dots by Curtis Cole, provided by Artlist. Please subscribe today and don't miss any of our weekly episodes.